What's up, everybody? My name is Tim Ruswick, and today we're going to talk about how to refine an idea down to its core and what specific elements of a game idea make something great. Now, this video assumes that you already have some sort of idea in your head. It doesn't actually talk about how to design ideas from the ground up. I have a video on that I'll link up above. But if you have fragments of an idea or you have something in your head already, this video will help you kind of refine that and make it into something awesome. So first up, let's talk about getting started. The first thing I do whenever I come up with an idea or I'm trying to create a new game is I brain dump everything. And basically what this means is you take a document, it can be Google Docs, it can be on paper in a notebook, whatever it is, and you just dump everything that you have into that document. I personally like to do digital documents because it allows you to edit, move things around, and change things. Paper doesn't really do that. But the idea behind this is that you kind of free up your brain to do other tasks. So all that stuff that's been sitting in your head about the idea, all the different things that you're thinking about, you put it on paper, and then it's no longer in your head and you have it somewhere where you can just let it sit there. And then your brain is actually freed up to do other tasks and think about other things and think about how you can improve the idea. And it also helps when you have later versions of the idea in your head, you can go back to the document and say, oh, well, that changed because it's different than the document. Next, you want to identify the inspiration. You're getting inspired from somewhere, right? And you have to identify that inspiration. You have to figure out where it's coming from. A lot of times we come up with ideas and we don't really know where they're coming from. It helps if you identify the inspiration and you can say, okay, this part of the game is kind of like this game, this part of the game is kind of like that game. That way you can kind of pick what you like from certain games and pick what you don't like from certain games. And you can make sure that you kind of avoid some of the failures that that game pulled off. At the same time, you can play to some of the strengths that some of the games that you like and were inspired by actually pulled off. So knowing where you're inspired from really helps. And third, you want to organize things on paper. So before you just kind of brain dump everything into a document, now you want to start to kind of massage those things and arrange them in a certain order and kind of group things under certain headings. Every game is different, every idea is different. If you have a story heavy game, you might want to start forming a plot structure from that. If you have a level-based game, maybe you have a bunch of level ideas, maybe you want to start organizing them in terms of complexity. If you have a mechanically driven game, you want to identify where you're going to have certain parts of the mechanic and where you're not, and how that works. Just kind of organize the idea as best as you can. Like I said, it's very different for different types of games, so there's no correct way to do this process, but it's just kind of one of those things where you take all the stuff that's in your head and it's dumped out on paper. You just kind of organize it into folders or groups or headings. This lets you see what's developed or underdeveloped. So if there's a bunch of stuff in one section, maybe that needs to be broken down into multiple sections. If there's not enough in a different section, maybe that section doesn't need to exist. Maybe it needs more content, whatever. It just kind of helps you go through everything and see where you're at with every little piece. So the next thing I do is I let my idea sit. I haven't found this really in a lot of different places on the internet that I've done research in. I haven't really found anybody else that's done something similar to this, but I like to let my ideas sit in my head for a couple days or a couple weeks. Sometimes it's longer than that, depending on what I'm working on or what my current project is. But I find that when something just sits in my head, it allows me to kind of formulate it over time. And it really helps that I had the brain dump before and I dumped everything that I knew about it in a document. Then it lets my brain kind of evolve the thing. Just going through my daily routine for a couple different days and letting my brain think about stuff, just not really thinking about the idea at all and letting it sit in my head kind of helps formulate it sometimes. Think about it in downtime. So if you're in the shower or you're riding your bike or whatever it is, whatever you're doing, it helps to kind of focus on it sometimes. If you're in a leisure activity, if you're in an activity that doesn't take a lot of focus, or you're in an activity that's maybe physically exhausting, but it doesn't take a lot of mental focus, I find that those are the best times to kind of concentrate. I also like to think about it like when I'm driving, for example. I can like let my mind kind of go and explore different concepts of it. That kind of helps refine the idea over time. Even though I don't kind of enter that state with an objective in mind, I'm not trying to say, how can I change this? Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just kind of let my brain go over it and little details start to just kind of formulate and and change over time. You want to write down any key components that you think of. So if you are in the shower or you are driving or whatever it is, wait till you're not endangering other people if you're driving, but then you probably want to write down the different ideas that you came up, and you can add them in your document. If there are sections that they go under, add them there. If you just need to add them in a general section, do that. But game ideas that I put through this process and they're given time, I feel like they come out significantly better than games that are rushed. Not always. Like game jams, for example, sometimes there are really cool concepts that come out of the strain and the creativity, but a lot of times having some extra time can really help. Now it's time to share the idea. The scary part for people that don't like people. Oh, I've been there. So the first thing is you want to talk to friends about it. I don't want to like hand them a questionnaire or anything. I just want to talk to them about it in passing and see what their initial thoughts and feelings are. Did they perk up? Were they excited about it? Did it feel cool? Is it something they want to know more about? And just kind of share it with them and kind of see what their thoughts are. Second, I like to bounce ideas off of them as well. Sometimes I might just share ideas with them and ask what they feel, but other times I might say, hey, what do you think of this? What happened if this character did this? What would you think of this type of mechanic? And just kind of go in detail, bounce ideas off. If you have a really creative person and they like to bounce ideas back and forth with you, that's a really effective process. I know a lot of us are solo developers, myself included, so it's kind of complicated and hard sometimes to pull this off. But it's really valuable when you do, because there's a lot of stuff in another human mind, and it helps to kind of go back and forth. You get a different perspective creatively. Just make sure that if you do this, you're not going to shut down ideas or say no, or just kind of stifle that creativity in any way. When you're bouncing ideas back and forth, negativity or rejection and that sort of thing can kind of shut people down creatively. So just make sure you're exploring all the possibilities. Oh, what if he did this crazy thing? What if she did this crazy thing? And just, it kind of helps with the creativity and flow. You don't have to keep all the ideas. Just make sure that they keep flowing. Talking to the professionals helps. Finding a mentor in the game industry, someone that's been through this or someone that has the experience that you're looking for. Talking to professionals in the AAA industry, people that work professionally on games in whatever you're trying to achieve, programming or story or aesthetics or whatever it is. Finding someone that's done this before and they do it professionally can really help. You can go to events and find a ton of these people that are super willing to help. When I was at GDC one year, I spent an hour with an engineer at Amazon, and he walked me through a complete way to kind of build my current project. It would have costed me a fortune to get an hour with this guy, but he was just sitting at the Amazon booth at GDC, and I talked to him and asked him a bunch of questions. As long as you're friendly and respectful of their time, a lot of people would be really happy to help. And professionals have a different perspective than like your friends would. Your friends are coming at it from gamers, but professionals might have a perspective on how to build something different, or how to differentiate yourself, or how to reduce your scope but improve your idea. A lot of things you might not think about. And lastly, sell the idea to random people. Now, I don't actually mean sell them like try and actually take their money, but I mean it in the context of like trying to get other people interested. If you have a game idea and you tell it to your target audience and that person is not interested, that's not a good sign. So the process of kind of selling through words really helps. This is where marketing experience totally helps. But understanding the different things that you say to people to get them excited can really help you refine what your game idea is. Certain words make people more excited than other words. Certain things might make people's ears perk up or make them pay attention, whereas other things might make their eyes glaze over and then get super bored. If you start to tell people different versions of your idea and certain versions work better, those are probably the ones that you want to go for, or at least try out. This is hard for introverts because sometimes you run out of people to test on, but I find that like in-person events or communities like our Discord, which the link is down in the description if you want to join that, is super helpful, because you have tons of people from all over the world and they're all happy to help because they all want help on their game too. And they can give you kind of a lot of perspective on that. So now it's time to trim the edges. You want to look for the necessity in your idea, the things that you need to have, and you kind of want to cut around everything that's not that. There's an old adage in film that if something in your plot structure doesn't move the plot forward, you cut it out. If there's stuff in your game that doesn't actually move the story forward, or it doesn't help mechanically, or it's not fun to play, or it just doesn't have a purpose to exist, a real reason behind it, maybe consider cutting that out. If there are level ideas or things that maybe are just bland, they're not super amazing, but they're not super horrible, maybe consider cutting that stuff out. Engineers do something similar. They cut out anything that's not necessary because they know that the more moving parts they have, the more likely their thing is to break down. The simpler, the better. Second, you want to cut the scope. Coming from a dude that's made 17 games and has literally played hundreds of indie games from the community, scope is almost always too big. So figure out ways to reduce the scope. What things don't need to be there, what things can be cut, what things can be saved for the sequel, what things can be added later. Just think about everything that you don't need at its core and just cut it down, because I guarantee you scope is too big at this point. You can always add it back later if you really need it. And lastly, pay attention to your instinct. If there's part of your idea that you really don't want to cut, you really feel like it's needed, a lot of times that's your creativity talking to you. This gets better with the more experience you have, so in the beginning it's kind of hard to tell what needs to be cut and what doesn't, because you can get really attached to your ideas. But generally you want to go with your gut. Like, after all, this is a creative medium. You want to be creative, you want to express yourself. And if there's something you feel that really needs to be in there for your creativity, maybe keep it in. Try and identify the things that really call to you and make you believe in them and want them to be a part of the game. So now it's time to find the core of the idea. The core of the idea is really important, because this is the essence of what your entire game is. If this isn't great, it's really hard to build a great game around it. So now you want to think about your objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Think about the financial, emotional, or creative objectives. What are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? Maybe you just want to be creative and create something awesome. Maybe you want to actually get a return on your investment financially. Maybe you want to invoke an emotion in somebody and really make them feel something. Does your game still fulfill these? Does your game fit within those restraints? Does what you're building, does your current idea actually make sense in the context of your objectives? You may need to refine it and change it to actually match your objectives. You want to look at the competition. What else is in the genre? How can you differentiate yourself from other stuff that's similar? If your game was similar to a game of the same genre, would people be able to tell the difference? You want to define the needs. What things do you need to have in your game? What things, when they're missing, destroy the entire game or the story or the aesthetics? What things, if you pulled away, would you not have a game anymore? And think about, what if your game was just that? Those are the core components, and those are things that you should probably build around or build onto. Maybe other things outside of those need to be cut. And now it's time to build the elevator pitch. From everything we've done so far, all of the refinement, all of the idea generation, all of the brain dumping, it all leads to this. Now it's time to build a sentence, a single sentence of what your game is about. You've talked to people, you've interacted with a bunch of people, you've bounced ideas off of friends, you've dumped a bunch of stuff in a document. What single sentence can describe your game from all of those experiences? What gets people the most excited? What sounds the most interesting? Which one of those things can actually be used to your advantage to get somewhere with your game? After you build the elevator pitch, you should build a prototype and test and tweak. And yes, I think prototyping is part of the idea phase, because there's so many things that you learn while you build a game. Your mechanic might not work out the way you thought it would. The storytelling method that you had might not work effectively. Building out a prototype of whatever it is you're trying to build and actually testing it out, maybe showing it to people, can really help. It lets you know the flaws in your idea, the problems that might arise. A lot changes in development, and a prototype can kind of help you see where your game is going. So now that we've been over a couple ways to refine your idea, now I want to talk about the elements of a great game. These are things that I think you should keep in mind while you come up with ideas and why you go through these phases, because I feel like even targeting just one of these can really make your game stand out. If you have more than one, I think you're doing really well. So the elements of a great game are simple yet deep. Is the game easy to learn but hard to master? Aesthetically differentiated. Doesn't have to look photorealistic, but is it aesthetically different from other games to where people can tell that it's your game? Mechanically engaging. Doesn't necessarily have to be fun. There are a lot of different types of games, but it has to be engaging. Connects well with people. If your game doesn't connect or resonate with a group or groups of people, you're doing something wrong. Sticks to its strengths. Different teams and different games have different strengths, and by sticking to the thing that you do well, you can double down on what you're fantastic at. So I think great games hit a lot of these points. I don't necessarily think you have to hit all these points, and I don't necessarily think this is all the points of a great game that there are. These are just the ones that I came up with. But I think if your idea hits on some of these, I think you're doing well. So that's it for this video. If you like content like this, consider giving me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button down below. We talk about everything game development and so much more on this channel, so I recommend you do that. Make sure to let me know your thoughts and your ideas on how to refine other game ideas down below. We can all learn from each other. But until next time, my name is Tim Roswick, and I'll see you again soon.